The screech of tires against the asphalt still echoed in my ears as I pulled the last cardboard box from the U-Haul, sweat dripping down my temple despite the crisp autumn air. The cul-de-sac was quiet, too quiet, like the neighborhood was holding its breath, waiting for something to snap. My new house, a modest two-story with peeling white paint and a sagging porch, stared back at me, promising a fresh start. But then, she appeared. Karen. Her shadow loomed long across my driveway, her arms crossed, lips pursed like she'd just sucked on a lemon. "You can't park that thing here," she spat, pointing at the U-Haul like it was a war crime. "It's against homeowners association rules." I froze, my hands gripping a box labeled, "Fragile, Kitchen." This was it. Day one, and the neighborhood dragon had already come for me. I set the box down, the glassware inside clinking softly, and forced a smile. "I'm just moving in," I said, voice steady despite the heat creeping up my neck. "It'll be gone by tonight." Karen's eyes narrowed, her blonde bob swaying as she tilted her head, sizing me up like I was a stray dog who'd wandered into her pristine kingdom. "You don't understand," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "This is my neighborhood. We have standards." The air smelled faintly of her floral perfume, cloying and artificial, mixing with the diesel fumes from the truck. I wanted to laugh, to tell her to chill, but the way her hand hovered near her phone told me she wasn't here for a friendly chat. Before I could respond, she whipped out her iPhone, her manicured nails clicking against the screen. "I'm calling 911, she announced, her voice dripping with righteous fury. "You're trespassing, and that truck is a public nuisance." My stomach dropped. Trespassing? On my own property? The deed was in my name, the ink barely dry, but Karen was already dialing, her eyes gleaming with the kind of glee only a petty tyrant could muster. I stood there, heart pounding, the distant hum of a lawnmower underscoring the absurdity of it all. This wasn't just a neighborly dispute. This was war. The cops arrived 10 minutes later, their cruiser rolling up with a lazy flash of lights. Two officers stepped out, one tall and lanky, the other stocky with a bored expression. Karen was in her element now, gesturing wildly, her voice climbing octaves as she recounted my crimes. "He's blocking the street. He's disrespecting our community," she wailed, clutching her pearls, literal pearls, gleaming against her pastel cardigan. I explained my side, keeping my voice calm, showing them the moving permit taped to the U-Haul's window. The lanky officer, whose name tag read Daniels, sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Ma'am, he's within his rights," he said. Karen's face turned beet red, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "This is unacceptable," she shrieked, stomping her foot. The officers exchanged a look, one I'd later learn was code for another homeowners association nutcase. That should have been the end of it. But Karen wasn't done. Over the next week, she became my shadow. Every morning, I'd find her standing at the edge of my lawn, clipboard in hand, scribbling notes about my violations. My grass was half an inch too long. My mailbox wasn't regulation height. My dog, a scruffy mutt named Max, barked once at 7 a.m., and Karen was there, banging on my door, threatening to report me for noise pollution. The air in the neighborhood grew heavy with her presence, like a storm cloud that refused to break. I started noticing the way other neighbors avoided her, their curtains twitching as she marched by, her heels clicking like a metronome of doom. Then came the surprise. One evening, as I sipped coffee on my porch, the scent of roasted beans mingling with the damp earth after a rain, an older woman shuffled up my driveway. She was tiny, her hair a wild halo of silver curls, her hands trembling as she clutched a manila envelope. "You're the new guy Karen's after, right?" she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. I nodded, wary. Her name was Mrs. Ellis, a retired librarian who'd lived here for 30 years. "She's done this before," she said, her voice low, urgent. "To me, to others. She's not just a busybody, she's dangerous." She handed me the envelope, her eyes wide with something like fear. Inside were documents, complaints, fines, even a lawsuit Karen had filed against a former neighbor who'd dared to paint their garage door blue. "She's the homeowners association president," Mrs. Ellis said, her voice cracking. "But she's not untouchable." That night, I pored over the papers, my kitchen table a mess of highlighters and post-its. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows as Max snored at my feet. Karen wasn't just a nuisance, she was a bully, weaponizing homeowners association rules to control the neighborhood. But there was a pattern. She'd overstepped, again and again, bending bylaws to suit her whims. One document caught my eye, a clause about trespassing on private property. My property. An idea sparked, sharp and dangerous, like a match flaring in the dark. The next morning, I set up a security camera, its red light blinking from my porch. Karen didn't disappoint. At 6:47 a.m., she was back, sneaking onto my lawn to measure my hedges with a ruler. My heart raced as I watched her on my phone's live feed, her face twisted in concentration. She didn't know I was recording. She didn't know I'd already called my lawyer, a friend from college who specialized in property disputes. When she stepped onto my porch, peering through my window, I opened the door. "Karen," I said, my voice cold, "you're trespassing." Her eyes widened, but she recovered quickly, puffing out her chest. "I'm enforcing the rules," she snapped. I held up my phone, showing the footage. "Not on my property, you're not." The lawyer's letter arrived at her door the next day. I watched from my window as she tore it open, her face crumpling like tissue paper. It was a cease and desist, citing her repeated trespassing and harassment, backed by the HOA's own bylaws. If she didn't stop, I'd sue. The neighborhood buzzed with whispers, Mrs. Ellis must have spread the word. Karen's reign was cracking, and she knew it. But she didn't back down. Not yet. The final showdown came at the next homeowners association meeting, held in the community center's fluorescent-lit basement. The air smelled of stale coffee and cheap air freshener, the folding chairs creaking under the weight of nervous neighbors. Karen stood at the podium, her voice shrill as she ranted about newcomers ruining the neighborhood. I stood up, my palms sweaty, and played the footage on the projector. Gasps rippled through the room as Karen's image flickered on the screen, sneaking, measuring, glaring through my window. "This isn't leadership," I said, my voice steady despite the knot in my chest. "This is harassment." Mrs. Ellis stood next, her frail voice cutting through the silence, recounting years of Karen's bullying. One by one, others joined in, their stories pouring out like a dam breaking. Karen's face drained of color, her hands gripping the podium as if it could save her. "You can't do this," she stammered, but the room was done with her. A vote was called. By a landslide, she was removed as Homeowners Association president. The gavel's crack echoed like a gunshot, and Karen fled, her heels clattering up the stairs. 2 weeks later, I watched from my porch as a moving van pulled up to her house. Karen loaded boxes, her movements jerky, her eyes avoiding mine. The neighborhood felt lighter, like it could finally breathe. Mrs. Ellis waved from her lawn, a small smile on her face. Justice wasn't loud or flashy, it was quiet, steady, like the sunrise creeping over the rooftops. I sipped my coffee, the bitter warmth grounding me, and thought about how sometimes, standing your ground is enough to topple a tyrant. Karen's van rumbled away, and I turned back to my house, ready to make it a home.